The sun sank behind the Arizona hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. The wind carried the dry scent of sagebrush across the barren land, whispering through the wooden fences of Carter's ranch. The place had once been full of life, cattle in the fields, laughter echoing from the porch, and his wife humming as she cooked by the open window. But those days were gone, buried beneath the dust of time. For years, Carter had lived alone, his only companions a few stubborn horses and the ghosts of his past. His beard had turned gray, his hands worn from years of hard work. Each evening, he sat by the fire with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the empty rocking chair across from him, her chair. The silence pressed heavy on him, yet he had grown used to it, as one grows used to pain. That evening, the sky darkened quicker than usual. Clouds gathered over the plains, thick and heavy with rain. Carter looked up from the porch, muttering, "Another storm." He moved slowly, gathering tools and leading the horses into the stable. By the time he shut the last gate, thunder rolled over the hills, and sheets of rain began to fall. Inside the cabin, he lit a lantern and tossed more wood into the fireplace. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. He'd seen plenty of storms before, they always passed. But tonight felt different, colder somehow. As he sat back down, the storm seemed to carry something in it, something alive. Then came the sound, a sharp, desperate knocking at the door. Carter froze, the sound echoing again, louder this time. Nobody ever came this far from town, especially not in weather like this. Grabbing his rifle, he approached the door slowly. "Who's there?" he called. A faint voice answered through the wind. "Please, help us." Carter hesitated, his heart pounding. He pulled the door open, and his breath caught. Standing before him were 5 women, their clothes soaked, faces pale, eyes wide with fear. Their skin was marked with the colors and beads of the Apache people. The one in front, tall and strong despite her exhaustion, looked straight into his eyes. "We seek shelter," she said, her voice trembling but proud. "Please, we will not trouble you long." For a long moment, Carter said nothing. The rain poured between them, soaking the floorboards. He had lived through the years when men like him were told not to trust the Apache, when both sides had lost too much blood to forgive. His first instinct was to send them away. But as he looked at their faces, the youngest barely more than a girl, the eldest clutching another's hand, something inside him softened. With a deep breath, he lowered his rifle. "Come in," he said quietly. As they stepped inside, dripping and shivering, Carter closed the door behind them. The fire crackled louder, its glow spreading across the cabin. The storm still raged outside, but for the first time in years, the old rancher's home wasn't empty anymore. The rain battered the roof through the night, but inside the cabin, the fire burned bright. The 5 Apache women huddled near it, their damp clothes steaming in the warmth. Carter watched them quietly, unsure what to make of their sudden arrival. He had spent years in solitude, now his home was filled with strangers who barely spoke his language. The eldest woman, with long braids streaked in silver, was clearly their matriarch. She kept the others close, her eyes sharp and protective. The tall one who had spoken earlier, the leader, Carter guessed, helped the younger ones dry their clothes and lay blankets near the hearth. She moved with grace, strength hidden under weariness. Carter cleared his throat. "You can stay the night," he said gruffly, setting a pot of stew over the fire. "But the storm might keep you here longer. Roads'll be mud by morning." The leader nodded respectfully. "We thank you," she said in accented English. "We had nowhere else." He poured stew into wooden bowls and passed them around. The women murmured something in Apache, a word that sounded like gratitude. The warmth and smell of food seemed to ease their fear. For the first time that night, Carter noticed how thin they were, faces hollow, hands trembling from exhaustion. After they ate, silence settled again. Only the crackle of fire and the rain filled the room. Carter leaned back, his rifle resting against the table, though he didn't feel the need to reach for it anymore. "What brings you out here?" he finally asked. The leader's eyes met his. "Soldiers," she said simply. "They burned our camp, took our men. We ran." Carter's jaw tightened. He had heard such stories before, raids and revenge that left only ashes behind. He had once fought in those same border skirmishes, believing he was doing the right thing. But over time, he had learned that war didn't care who was right, it only took. "I see," he said quietly. "You're safe here for now." One of the younger women, her face barely out of childhood, looked up shyly. "You live alone?" Carter nodded. "Long time now." The older woman glanced around the cabin, at the photographs on the mantel, at the folded quilt on the rocking chair. "Your wife?" she asked softly. He looked at the fire, his voice rough. "Gone. Years back." No one spoke after that. The women seemed to understand, loss was something they all carried. As the night deepened, the rain softened into a steady whisper. The youngest fell asleep first, curled up near the fire. One by one, the others followed. The leader stayed awake the longest, her eyes reflecting the firelight as she watched the door, alert, even in safety. Carter finally stood and threw another log on the flames. The warmth spread across the cabin, and for the first time in years, he felt something he'd forgotten, a quiet sense of purpose. Outside, the storm moved on. Inside, two worlds that had once been enemies shared the same fire, bound by survival and silence. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a still, silver world. The ground outside was soaked, the air fresh and cool. Carter stepped onto the porch, his boots sinking into the mud, and drew in a deep breath. The storm had stripped the sky clean, now it stretched white and blue, the kind of morning only the desert could give. When he walked back inside, the smell of coffee and wood smoke greeted him. To his quiet surprise, the Apache women were already awake. They had tidied the cabin, folded the blankets, and swept the floor with neat precision. One of them was tending the fire while another boiled water in an old iron pot. "You've been busy," Carter said, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The leader, Nita, he had learned her name during the night, turned toward him with a faint smile. "We have hands," she said. "We can work." He chuckled softly. "Not many guests do that around here." She didn't answer right away, but her eyes softened. "We are not guests. We are alive because of you. We give thanks the way we know." Her words caught him off guard. He wasn't used to gratitude, not anymore. For years, people had forgotten he even lived out here. Now, somehow, his empty home was full again. Breakfast was simple, beans, bread, and coffee, but they shared it like a feast. The women spoke quietly in their language, their voices rising and falling like music. Carter didn't understand the words, yet something about the sound eased him. It had been so long since laughter filled these walls. After they ate, the women stepped outside to wash their faces in the rain barrels and gather sticks for the fire. Carter watched from the porch as the youngest chased a stray chicken across the yard, her laughter ringing through the crisp morning air. He couldn't help but smile, the ranch hadn't felt this alive in years. When Nita came to stand beside him, he asked, "You got family out there somewhere?" She nodded. "Scattered. Some taken. Some hiding in the hills." He lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry. I've seen what happens out there. Ain't fair." Nita looked toward the horizon, her voice steady. "Fairness is a word men made. The earth doesn't know it. The earth only knows who survives." Carter nodded, understanding more than he could say. For the first time, he saw not refugees, but strong survivors, women who had lost everything and still found reason to stand. By afternoon, the sun was high, and the ground began to dry. Carter showed them where to fetch water, how to feed the horses, and where the chickens laid eggs. They listened closely, eager to help. As the day faded into gold, Nita stood beside him once more. "Your home," she said quietly, "it is a good place." Carter looked around at his land, the fences, the barn, the old house that creaked in the wind. For the first time in years, it truly did feel like home. And deep in his chest, something warm began to stir, a feeling he hadn't known in a long, long time. Weeks passed, and the ranch began to hum with life again. The once empty fields that had lain dry and forgotten were now full of movement and laughter. The Apache women worked side by side with Carter, mending fences, tending to the garden, and nursing the sick calf that had nearly died in the cold. Carter watched in quiet awe as they transformed his lonely land. Nita, with her calm strength, seemed to command both people and nature. She had a way of touching the earth, hands gentle, eyes focused, that reminded him of his late wife, who used to hum while planting spring flowers near the porch. Sometimes, when dusk fell and the sky turned the color of whiskey, the women would sing. Their voices rose in haunting harmony, filling the valley with echoes that carried across the open plains. Carter would sit on the porch, hat in hand, listening. The sound healed something deep in him, something that years of solitude had buried. One evening, as the air turned cool, Nita joined him outside. "We owe you much," she said softly. "You gave us more than shelter." Carter looked at her, his weathered face unreadable. "I didn't give you nothing you didn't earn yourselves." You worked hard, same as me. She smiled faintly, her dark hair glinting in the dying light. Still, we are safe here. That is rare for people like us. He hesitated, then said, you don't have to leave. Not if you don't want to. There's room here for all of you, plenty of work, plenty of land. Nita looked toward the distant hills, where the sunset bled into the horizon. You would let us stay. Even after what people say about my kind. Carter met her eyes, steady and firm. I don't care what folks say. Out here, it's just us and the land. And the land don't judge nobody. Her lips trembled, just slightly, and for a moment, all her strength gave way to something tender. Then we will stay, she whispered. That night, the cabin glowed with warmth and light. The women cooked stew while Carter fixed a broken window. Laughter and the smell of herbs filled the air. For the first time in a decade, he felt like he wasn't alone in the world. As the fire crackled low, Nita sat beside him, her eyes reflecting the flames. You were alone a long time, she said gently. Too long, he admitted. Now you have people, she said. A family. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He nodded, unable to speak. Outside, the coyotes howled, not in menace, but as if joining the song of a new beginning. The ranch had been a place of silence and ghosts. Now, it was alive again. With voices, hope, and the promise of another sunrise. And as Carter closed his eyes that night, he realized that the 5 Apache women hadn't just found shelter on his ranch. They had given him something even rarer, a reason to live again. By spring, the ranch no longer looked like the same place. What had once been a forgotten patch of land, wind-beaten and lifeless, now thrived with green shoots, grazing horses, and laughter echoing across the valley. The Apache women had not only stayed, they had rebuilt the ranch from the dust up, piece by piece. Carter would often wake before dawn and find them already at work. 2 were milking the goats, another feeding chickens, and Nita tending to the small patch of vegetables near the barn. Every morning began with purpose, and every night ended with peace. For the first time in years, he looked forward to both. One morning, as sunlight poured over the hills, Carter leaned on the fence, watching Nita braid a horse's mane. You've turned this old ranch into something beautiful, he said, his tone both admiring and soft. Nita glanced up, her eyes shining. We did this together. The land remembers kindness, and it gives it back. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's true for people, too. Nita looked at him for a long moment, and in that silence, there was an understanding, something deeper than words. They were 2 souls scarred by loss and time, yet brought together by chance and survival. Later that day, they all gathered to build a new fence. The youngest, Tala, laughed as she tried to lift a heavy beam and nearly fell. Carter caught it just in time, and the whole group burst into laughter. The air was light, easy, filled with a joy that had no language. When the sun dipped below the hills, they sat together for supper. Nita prepared corn cakes and beans, and Carter fetched a jar of old whiskey he had been saving for years. He poured a little for each of them. To second chances, he said, raising his cup. Nita repeated softly, to life finding a way. As the firelight flickered across their faces, Carter felt something stir in his chest, not the ache of loneliness but the warmth of belonging. He realized that the women had become more than company or workers, they were family, bound not by blood but by choice. In the following weeks, travelers and ranch hands passing through began to notice the change. Didn't think that old ranch was still alive, one man said. Carter only smiled and replied, it's more alive than ever. But the true test came one afternoon when a group of rough drifters rode up, demanding food and water. Carter stood tall, his hand near his revolver, but before he could speak, Nita stepped forward, her voice calm yet fierce. You will take what we offer and give thanks for it, or you will leave. Something in her gaze made the men back down. They took what was given and rode away without another word. Carter watched, half in awe. You've got more courage than most men I've met, he told her. Nita smiled. This place is home now. We protect what we love. As the stars filled the night sky and the wind whispered across the plains, Carter sat on the porch, his heart full. He had lived alone for years, believing his story was over. But the arrival of 5 Apache women had given him a new one, a story of healing, courage, and the quiet promise of tomorrow. The ranch was no longer just his. It was theirs, a sanctuary born from dust and redemption, standing strong under the endless western sky. Summer came to the plains like a slow fire, painting the hills gold and setting the horizon ablaze every evening. The ranch thrived under the sun's warmth, cattle grazing lazily, crops standing tall, and laughter echoing from the yard where the Apache women hung freshly washed clothes. Carter had aged quietly over the months. His shoulders were still broad, his hands still strong, but there was a softness in his eyes now, a peace he hadn't known in decades. He'd stopped counting the years since his wife's passing. Instead, he measured time by sunrises and the sound of voices he'd grown to love. One morning, as the first light broke across the land, he rode out with Nita to the ridge above the ranch. From there, the world stretched endlessly, wild and beautiful. The wind played with her dark braids, and Carter thought she looked like part of the land itself, untamed and eternal. "You remember the day you came here?" he asked. "That storm?" Nita smiled faintly. "I remember. I thought the sky would swallow us. And now," she gestured to the ranch below, "alive and thriving. It's as if the land decided to start over, just like us." Carter nodded, his throat tight. "You gave this place life again. I reckon I was just waitin' for someone to remind me how to live." She looked at him, eyes full of quiet warmth. "And you gave us safety. A home." They sat in silence for a while, watching hawks circle in the distance. The land stretched beneath them, breathing, alive, vast, and eternal. When they rode back down, the women greeted them with cheerful noise and laughter. Tala was teaching a young colt to walk the fence line, while the others prepared lunch. It felt like a family gathering, something Carter once thought he'd never see again. But life, like the land, had its cycles. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything in orange fire, Carter sat on the porch, pipe in hand. Nita joined him quietly, her steps soft. "You look tired," she said. He smiled gently. "Maybe. But it's a good kind of tired." She sat beside him. "You've done much, Carter. The land will remember you." He turned to her, voice low. "If it remembers me, I hope it remembers you too. You and your sisters, you're part of this place now." Nita looked toward the horizon. "Then we will stay. We'll keep it alive." As the last light faded, Carter's hand brushed hers. For a long time, neither spoke. The air was warm, the night calm, and the stars began to bloom one by one above them. A few weeks later, when the harvest came, the ranch stood proud, full of life, laughter, and hope. Carter's health had begun to fade, but his spirit never dimmed. One morning, they found him on the porch, head resting on his chest, eyes closed as if he were simply napping. The sunrise bathed him in gold. He had gone peacefully, the same way he'd lived these last months, surrounded by the land he loved and the people he'd saved. Nita buried him beneath the old oak tree overlooking the valley. She marked the spot with a carved wooden cross and whispered, "You gave us shelter. We will keep your light alive." Years later, travelers passing through still spoke of that ranch, the one run by 5 Apache women who turned a dying land into a sanctuary. They said the spirit of an old cowboy watched over them, guarding his home beneath the endless western sky. And when the wind blew softly across the plains, it carried his promise still, that kindness, once given, never truly dies.